My name is Daniel, and I am creative director and co-founder of River. And well, thanks for taking your time to share it with me today. We've been invited here by Autodesk because we found this sort of interesting niche a few years ago when we realized that Flash and Autodesk seemed to be a wonderful, beautiful match. And given the background where we come from, I'm going to hand it over to Nicholas and Marcus really shortly and let them share with you some of their learnings, more hands-on concretely when working with the gaming industry, particularly in some cases with Battlefield and Dust. But before I do that, I just want to very briefly talk to you about our background to make sort of sense on where we come from. We've been around for a long time. Being a digital agency means that we're working with all kinds of industries, all kinds of different clients. And we started working a lot with the movie industry back in 1997 when everything used to be Flash. And back then, it was about making websites for the sake of having a website without really thinking too much about it. But everything needed to be really pretty, and the wow factor was really everything that we were going for. What happened was that we've seen firsthand what happened to Flash throughout the past 15 years. It sort of went out of fashion for a while with the introduction of mobile devices, iPhone not supporting Flash, social media, HTML5 technologies, all that stuff. Kind of, when all that occurred, we sort of saw our primary technology die before our eyes. But then what happened was in 2008, roughly, we came across Autodesk and Scaleform, and it turned to be this entry point to creating these awesome UIs for games. And all of us being hardcore gamers, we were super excited about that. So, UI is so exciting. If you think about it for a second, UI is sort of everywhere around us. We're seeing all these sort of everything being digital, everything being mobile, everything being connected. We're seeing UI everywhere around us, all of in our everyday lives, right? We're seeing call for action buttons. We're checking in. We're doing all sorts of things, and that is so exciting because we get to sort of shape people's everyday lives and have this sort of familiar icons and familiar user interface in so many more things than just simple UI for games. It's sort of becoming an extension of our everyday lives. So that, I mean, I keep coming back to us being organized as an agency. We are an agency first and most, but what is exciting about that is agencies tend to talk about brands. If you ever had sort of the experience of talking to agencies, you know that they keep sort of coming back to, talking about brand building, brand identity, brand strategy, all that stuff, brand, right? But the interesting thing about it is once you start applying that brand knowledge, that brand thinking onto UI, it becomes more than just a simple user interface for a game. It becomes a personality. So before I hand it over, some of the stuff, the inside creativity is where everything sort of begins for us when we attack a project. That's the understanding of the audience, understanding of the game, understanding of the technology, all that sort of insight then translates into a visual design phase. And everything that we do is based on technology, and we need the interaction design to sort of bridge those two competences. But most importantly, all of us being hardcore gamers, obviously, that passion for game, all that stuff is what's sort of binding all these different skills and competences together. And what that ultimately translates into is our philosophy today is, and our promise, if you will, that Marcus and Nicola will talk to you guys about, is extending the game experience beyond the actual gameplay. And I'm going to hand it over to Nicholas right now.
Is this on? Yeah. Hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicholas. I'm a Flash developer at River. Previously, I've been working for Dust with Battlefield 3. They used, of course, Frostbite 2 engine. Right now, I'm working on Dust 5.14. It's a CCP game, and they use the Unreal Engine. Both of these engines, of course, have great capabilities for using Scaleform, and that's what I'm going to talk a bit about today. Scaleform is the world-leading software for UI development, and since it came along and since I started working with it, it has really made my life much, much easier. I would like to introduce to you, this is the evil designer. We will come back to him a bit later in my presentation, but I wanted to know him. So let's take a look at Dust 5.14 first. this is a really cool game. It's a game from CCP. It's a game taking place in the Unreal, the Eve universe, New Eden. It's a first-person shooter game exclusively for PlayStation 3. And unfortunately, in this project, we came in a bit late. But fortunate for us, most of the design, the flows, wireframes and stuff like that was already done. So that made our life much easier. But we actually had to work a lot with restructuring the UI system. And together with CCP Games, we actually managed to do a really good system. And that's something I'm going to come back to a bit later. One of the coolest aspects of this game, what I think at least, is how connected it is to the Eve game. So Eve players can interact with the Dust players, and the Dust players can, of course, interact with the Eve players. They can buy stuff, they can sell stuff to the Eve market, they can chat with each other, send mails, manage contacts or whatever. And of course, almost all of this is represented in somehow in the UI. Like the chat system is UI based, the mail, everything is somehow represented in the UI, and that's something that we really enjoy working with, and we spend a lot of time making it feel right and cool. And as you can see here on the fitting screen, this is the fitting screen for Dust, and if you played Eve before, you will actually recognize a lot of it. You will feel familiar, and of course this is not coincidence. This is something that we worked a lot with, and we spent a lot of time making the Eve player who comes in and plays Dust for the first time feel at home, feel welcome, feel he's going to recognize what he's doing. So let's talk a bit about Battlefield 3. Of course, you all know it's built on the incredible Frostbite 2 engine. It's actually the first game shipped from DICE using Scaleform. They had other systems before, and since Scaleform came along, it was a real blessing for us UI developers. It made everything much easier and much more fun. And in this project, we actually got involved really early. We spent a total of 2 years on this project, and we got started, of course, with a lot of planning. We did flow charts. You can see here, it's a lot of flows. And we created a bunch of wireframes, as you can see here. And all of this pre-development stuff took almost half a year for us to finish up. And of course, after we started developing, a lot of this stuff spilled into the development phase as well. We updated the wireframes, we updated the flow charts. Stuff changes, you know that. So one of the things that I really enjoyed with this project is the 3D capabilities that Scaleform gives us. As you can see here in the main menu, it's actually tilted in 3D. And this is really easy for us Flash developers and UI developers to just change right with ActionScript code, Flash code. And you don't have to involve any C++ programmer, any backend programmer at all. You can do this by yourself together with the designer. You can play around, make it feel good, make it look good. And this is one of the things that I enjoyed most working with on the Battlefield project. And of course, one thing that Scaleform also gives us the opportunity to do is render the UI on top of 3D meshes. Like you can see here in the jet planes, you can see it in the helicopters, and even in the tanks. And this gives us the opportunity and the control to make the UI feel more solid, more realistic, and you can see it in front of you. It's real, and that's something that we also enjoyed working with a lot. So now, I'm going to tell you about two stories, two ways of developing a UI. I've actually experienced both of them, and the reason for me telling you about this is to illustrate the importance and importance of planning and preparing the UI before you actually start developing. So say that you have 15 screens that you're going to develop. The UI developer is going to do headers, lists, buttons, all that stuff that's going into almost all UI screens nowadays. So the developer starts adding a header to a screen. He adds lists and he adds buttons. And this developer isn't the greatest one, so he just copies and pastes everything. He creates all 50 screens. He grabs the headers from different screens and stuff like that. And he ends up with a lot of unique assets. Now, the evil designer that I told you about comes in and he wants to change one of the headers, or all headers, to a red color. He don't like the white color. And this, of course, means a lot of time that the developer has to spend on just going through all pages, changing each and every header. And this is something that he didn't enjoy. Later on, the UI designer comes in and wants to change all the buttons as well. And of course, this takes a lot of time as well. This is something that really makes the developer and the designer really bad friends. So this is another alternative, and this is my favorite alternative, of course. It requires a bit more planning and a bit more time, but in return we get a much more flexible system, and we actually save time in the end. So we still have 15 screens, but this time the developer creates all the assets before. So he has a header, he has a list, and he has a button component. This is something he's going to do, which is called shared assets. He's going to have one instance of everything that's going to be represented on each screen. So he creates these screens, he adds the headers, the lists, and the buttons. This time around, when the evil designer comes in and wants to change the header to the red color, as soon as the developer changes the color in the first header file, it's going to be represented on all screens, just like that, just like magic, and it's going to save him a lot of time. This is going to take about approximately 5 minutes for him to do. And the designer comes in and changes everything, as you can see. And in the end, the developer and the evil designer will be best friends forever, of course. And this is actually that easy, so the designer can go in himself and change the colors and change positions, change sizes, whatever. And he doesn't. The developer can keep developing stuff, and the designer can do what he's good at, designing stuff. And of course, you all know this isn't some secret recipe that we at River have. This is a common knowledge. But the thing that I wanted to illustrate with this is that we have to take time before we start developing and not just put stuff in. Take some time, plan how you want it to be, and you're going to save time, a lot of time in the end. So now I would like to hand over to Marcus. Thank you for me.
Thank you. My name is Marcus, and I'm a development director at River. And I'm actually going to continue on that note that Niklas just talked about, how important it is to actually do proper planning in a UI project. Because the gaming market today is so much more complex than it was just a couple of years ago. The users, the gamers, have several ways of actually interacting with the games, with the products. They can do it from mobile devices, from web pages, and of course from consoles right away. But whatever the entry point might be, it's important to know that first impression will last. And for us to actually develop a UI that works and is consistent, we need to think about UI really, really early to do that proper planning. And we would actually claim that if this is done correctly, the UI could be the core of the user experience that goes beyond the game, that goes actually outside the game. Because in this process, when we're working with UI, this is the first place when everything comes together actually outside the game. We work with the visual representation of the game, we work with the sound, the motion design, and of course the interaction as well. So internally, when we talk UI at River, we tend to talk more about user experience design, because there are some assumptions that UI is equal to information architecture, like wireframes, flowcharts, and all that. But that might not be fundamentally wrong, but it narrows down UI to something less than it actually is. And what we try to ask ourselves at River when we start a project, a UI project, is what do we want the player to actually feel before they jump into the game? Because it's not just like, it's just not about usability, right? It's about actually telling that story to extract that game experience from the game. And user experience design takes other aspects into consideration as well. Just like Daniel talked about before, that we love to talk about brand, but it's really important actually, because we think about things like emotions, how the player feel, and we also, of course, work a lot about the aesthetics, the visuals, but we also reconsider time actually. So we need to consider when the user experienced it for the first time, but also the duration of time he actually interacts with the game. So one example would be when we design a UI, we of course need to design it so it's cool enough and bring out that wow factor the first time he interacts with it. But it needs to work like hundreds of hours later as well, so it needs to be good enough and fast enough for that. And this is exactly why we try to work as close as possible to the dev team. We like to see ourselves as one team actually, and if we do that, the result is always best if we actually can work together. But communication is really key here. We need to understand each other. We need to understand the sort of core message of that game, and the only chance for us to do that is to be with the dev team. And just like some studios like to divide single-player development and multiplayer development, we would like to see UI as a third installment that actually binds the experience and sort of push that experience to the outside world. And it's also important to know that in the process of UI, a lot of the elements we work with can actually be used or adapt to other platforms. As you can see here, web pages and campaigns and mini-games, and that's why the UI is equally important as the key art, because when the user actually interacts with the UI, he interacts with the brand, and that's hugely important. That goes back to what I said before, first impression last. So we said before that the game experience of today reaches far beyond the actual gameplay, and that in-game activities should be connected to the outside world. But what do we really mean by this, and what has changed? So back in the day, the gamer could only experience the game back in the home, right, in front of the TV. And during the day, on buses, in school, on the jobs, all they could do really was to sort of think about how awesome it would be to just come back home to experience that game again. And at best, they could brag about last night's high score, and but to actually prove that, they had to bring their friends home and show it on the TV. So today it's a different story, right? And I don't have to convince you guys that everything is now mobile. But what's really interesting about this is that we are now connected to our audience, to the gamer, in a much wider time frame, virtually anywhere, anytime. And apparently the people in New York is spending 39 minutes one-way commuting. And I done the math, it's 360 hours a year. They're just sitting on subways, on buses, with their smartphones and waiting. And this is just one of many opportunities we need to take advantage of as UI developers. Because here we can actually reach the gamers out there, in the outside world, in the everyday life. And this creates even more challenge for us as well. But before we had to develop UI that worked properly, looked good and all that inside the game. Now we actually have to take into consideration all the other platforms. But we also need to see the possibilities with these platforms, what the actually benefits are with the smartphones and tablets and all that. So, but that's also the beauty with UI. We don't necessarily need a 3D engine to extend the game experience, because UI is often represented by 2D objects, right? And that is easily extracted, especially with Scaleform, to other platforms such as web and mobile devices. One example, if you're playing an FPS game, you're sitting back home in front of your giant TV with your amazing surround system, you just want to jump into the game right away, right? And take that same game into another platform, for a smartphone, for example. The game experience might not be the same and shouldn't be the same, really, because we should take the advantage of these new platforms or these new devices. The player could instead have an experience of preparing his game, preparing his soldier, or just communicating to other players through this device. And with this as foundation, you can imagine if a game actually requires internet connectivity. The boundary between the gamer and the games are more open now than ever. And this makes us super excited. This is exciting, very, very exciting. Because we truly believe that true loyalty comes from engagement. And the more we can engage the gamer, the more he will love the product, love the brand, and love the game. So when you think UI from now on, I don't want you to think just menus and HUDs. I want you to think of it as actually the possibility to be that core to extend the game experience to the outside world. But nothing of this will, of course, matter if the game is not good enough. And that is exactly we want you guys, you game developers, to focus on what you do best, and that is to actually creating awesome games. And I can imagine that UI for you guys isn't the most important part, and maybe not even the most exciting part. But for us at River, we really are passionate about creating that UI and making that extendable to the outside world. And together, I think we can create something amazing. And if we do this together and we focus on each area, we can create so much more value to the gamer in the end. So on that note, I want to thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, just come up and talk to us. And thank you.
Thanks a lot, Marcus.